Okay, this is a do-over of yesterday's Clinton Action Lyme and the Harvard Lyme Group conference on scientific validity and the testing for Lyme disease. Part 2 is biomarkers of disease. Yesterday we did, or at least it was captured, the portion where we discussed how do you validly diagnose Lyme, and we demonstrated that there have been validated methods for diagnosing Lyme since the early 90s. And since I was operating the camera and giving the talk yesterday, I'm going to quickly review the documents that I brought out and put them on the video monitor so that you can see these are real documents, whose names are on them, and so forth. I'll try to go as quickly as I can so that this tape doesn't take more than an hour, and you can always replay it. This is the conference overview. Work. Okay. I don't think holding it up is going to work because I can't really see what I'm doing. That was the initial query where we found out that there are certain specific criteria for validating a method, and I showed people how to search for those. And I went on to demonstrate that there are FDA rules as regards validating methods. It's hard for me to tell if this is capturing any of this. This is the FDA's document, and let me see. I don't know if you can see it, but I can see selectivity, accuracy, precision, recovery, calibration curve. That would be like linearity, stability, blah 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 blah. So that's an FDA document saying that those are the requirements. Okay. And I went on to talk about Mark Klintner very quickly and his matrix metalloproteinases in the spinal fluid. And I mentioned that Mark Klintner, although he published this and said that patients with neuroborreliosis and encephalopathy often have subtle neuropsychiatric illness with memory deficit, irritability, or somnolence, blah 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 blah. You can see that he at one time said that Lyme disease was very serious and affects thinking and affects the brain, and then later said that there were no objective markers of illness. I showed people quickly how to use the National Library of Medicine. Here is the query bar, and over here is where you select the taxonomy database to see all of the different kinds of Borrelia and the fact that they're classified by flagellin. Here's looking for just Borrelia in the taxonomy database, and you can find all of those species or strains, however they want to call it. And this is a phylogram. How are these spirochetes related genetically? This is how these scientists think of these spirochetes. Spirochetes are spirochetes, and they have certain morphological characteristics like the length and amplitude of their waves, and that's all determined by the molecular structure of the flagellin protein. So the flagellants are specific to species and genera. Borrelia is considered a genus. And here is Alan Barber's patent for Borrelia lone stari, and you can see that was sent for this patent was applied for in 1995. This is and so that means that for the last 10 or 11 years, they most certainly have known how to identify a tick-borne spirochete-like illness in people down south. Although the taxonomy database will tell you that there's just a bazillion different Borrelia all over the place. CDC is being hyper anal about who gets to be diagnosed with Lyme, and they say only people with a hypersensitivity reaction to OSPE can have Lyme, which is clearly nonsense, as I demonstrated yesterday. This is the molecular characterization of the humoral response to the 41 kilodalton flagellar antigen of Borrelia burgdorferi, the Lyme disease agent, and Errol Fickrig, Daniel Rahn, and Richard Flavell. I said flagell yesterday, Flavell. They published this in 1991. This is a validated method for detection of Lyme, specific to Borrelia burgdorferi, and they applied for a patent for it, and that patent is 5618533. Sorry, this is all jiggly, it's not easy to do. And then Borrelia burgdorferi infection of the brain. See if this is going to stand up, because I want to zoom in on the title and make sure people see it clearly. Borrelia burgdorferi infection of the brain. In case anyone doubts, that it is well known that Borrelia permanently infect the brain. That's what Borrelia do. This is on my website. You want to click here for all of the rest of the scanned in articles. Here's Alan Barber. Here's Alan saying these tick-borne infections are notable for multiphasic antigenic variation through DNA recombinations in the case of relapsing fever, the occurrence of chronic arthritis in the case of Lyme disease, and invasion and persistence in the brain in the case of both diseases. He wrote the book entitled Lyme Disease, the Cause, the Cure, and the Controversy, which I'm not even sure if I have my copy of still, or I gave it to the U.S. Attorney. But it's a completely unreferenced bunch of crap, and if anybody thinks it makes any sense, then those people who think it makes sense need to have their heads examined. This is the page out of my treasure textbook entitled The Biology of Parasitic Spirochetes. Okay? So, Borrelia and all spirochetes are parasites. They're not regular bacteria. They belong in the class with trypanosome, sleeping sickness, and so forth. And that one page that I copied out of here says, the ability of Borrelia, especially tick-borne strains, to persist in the brain and in the eye during remission after treatment with arsenic or with penicillin, or even after apparent cure, is well known. That chapter is done by Jay Sanford of the U.S. Armed Forces Military Hospital or something like that. So yesterday I went over how to find out what's a valid method. I talked about how Yale's Borrelia-specific flagellin method was validated. I talked about matrix metalloproteinases in the spinal fluid, and how later Mark there were no such objective markers of disease when it's just plain a lie. And I also mentioned that OSPE is considered a superantigen. That is, it causes a hyper-allergic inflammatory kind of response in certain people who have Steers kind of HLA. This is a document that's dated October 4th, 2004, that was sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office, 2.5 years ago. The U.S. Attorney in Connecticut's name is Kevin O'Connor. Mrs. Kevin O'Connor worked in John Rowland's legal office during all the Rowland Gate crimes, and she's the one who advised Mr. Rowland to appoint her husband as the U.S. Attorney. So that's who we have now. And these documents sit there in his office collecting dust, because there's no one there competent to look into the matter, or they're covering up this huge scam. And whatever the reason, his lack of response just means to me he's just totally incompetent mentally. So this data package says the Lyme RICO case, racketeering influenced in corrupt organizations, because that's what this whole scam is about. Central RICO entity is the American Lyme Disease Foundation. It's ALDF.com. Appears to have been founded by Kaiser and SmithKline together. New York Medical College was financially floundering. There was a gentleman there who was president, John J. Connolly, C-O-N-N-O-L-L-Y, 2 O's and 2 L's. And he basically sold out the New York Medical College to this little enterprise, and he was made head of the ALDF, and then he went on to found something entitled CastleConnolly.com, CastleConnolly.com. They print and publish top doctors, and the top doctors in Lyme are always like Robert Schoen, who we know is a huge fraud, and he's the kind of guy who says if you don't have a big arthritis in a knee, you don't have Lyme, I don't know what you have. That's what he said to me, even though I had positive blood tests for myself and my children. He told me, I don't know what you have disease. So, it would be comical if it were not so tragic. The defendants are the experts. Originally, Lyme was a borreliosis, a permanent brain infection. Later, the very same guys said Lyme is hypochondria, Munchausen's anxiety, blah, 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 all that bullshit, all those wastebasket diagnoses. Borrelioses cause multiple sclerosis, lupus, delirium, and dementia, so-called disorders without physical signs. There's an NIH trial where rapid cycling bipolar studied in teenagers had the criteria where people who had tested positive for Lyme were excluded. Chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis, fibromyalgia, Lou Gehrig's disease. That's why it was called the great new imitator. What really people should understand is that these diseases are really not all that well understood. These diseases are syndromes. We know that Lyme causes XYZ pathological markers, which we'll go into. This, let me see if this looks okay on the screen. I hope it does. This title page is General Types of Antigens, and this is a spirochete, I claim, and the cross-section of it is this, and I'm saying that there are items on the surface of it, molecules, that are different types, and when the spirochete is eaten up by the macrophage guys and digested and presents an antigen through the antigen-presenting cells, which I will have to rediscuss because I went through this yesterday but didn't get captured. And those types of molecules can be phospholipids. Lyme causes an antiphospholipid syndrome. That's why Yale University's L2 Diagnostics was formerly known as the Lyme and Lupus Clinic at Yale. Gangliosides, that's a general structure. It's a sugar. That's my rendition of OSPE. It, that's just the, that's probably not even right. I'm going to bring out another clear molecular structure on that later. And these lipoproteins are what they call ligands, although I'm not really sure if what they bind to is not really the ligand, or is it the thing on the spirochete that it uses to bind human or other mammalian cells. But it's part of an ABC transporter complex. That means the spirochete attaches to a cell, and then it either exudes some endotoxins of some sort or enzymes, and can transport again then back from the host what it needs, because it's a parasite, so it needs stuff from its host, and that would be a way of getting it. It has to basically suck membranes. That's if it's not intracellular, getting stuff in there. Heat shock protein of barrel shape. The phospholipids and the gangliosides are not detected on Western blot, because Western blotting is for proteins. These are not proteins. This is the phospholipid and this is sugar. And here is my rendition of a spirochete. That's probably the worst one I ever drew in my life. They're parasites, so they suck membranes, and lymphocytes are their second favorite flavor, according to Dave Dorward. We all, the privileged among us, got to see Dave Dorward's video where we saw a spirochete lyse a cell, and the thing just exploded. But he has proven that these spirochetes have an affinity for lymphocytes, which are immune cells. So what he demonstrated was that these spirochetes can kill immune cells. That's another mechanism of immune suppression. And this little explainer is entitled Current Method of Detection. You take the bugs, you sonicate them, break them up, you come up with all of these species that are components of the spirochete: lipoproteins, phospholipids, RNA, DNA, subcellular components, glycolipids, flagellum, blah, 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 blah. And then you try to spot it on something, do separation science again, like I said yesterday, to identify separate species. Once you've separated them, then you can identify them. The way we do it now is apparent molecular weight. When bound with antibodies, I suppose that's spectrophotometric method, or it could be staining, or I don't know what. But nevertheless, they identify the species, but they really can't quantitate them unless they were to do something like capillary electrophoresis and had a decent detector. Right now they have an eyeball detector, so it's all subjective, the interpretation of your Western blot. But there are other markers of disease that are not captured in Western blotting, i.e. these gangliosides, or glycolipids, or phospholipids that are, well, we know there's at least one specific glycolipid, the Broderick-Dorfrite. That means it only occurs in BB. But we're not allowed to use that as a potential way to identify if a person has Lyme. This is on my website. It's kind of my general explainer of HLA, or human so-called autoimmunity. Let's see, what's the short version? Everybody comes into this world with a potential to either fight disease, succumb to disease, or have like an allergy reaction to disease. Lyme arthritis is an allergic reaction to ospae in the knee. Few people have it. I've met one person. That person then got wrecked because they got the vaccine, and they subsequently sued. This would be like a lymphocyte, and this little clam-shaped molecule at the top is the HLA molecule. Human leukocyte antigen. But it's really an antigen-presenting molecule. Like, say this panda bear is an antigen, and my hands are my HLA molecule. Say this panda bear is a fragment of flagellin. My hands are the HLA molecules, and I'm a lymphocyte. And so, the lymphocyte, have digested a spirochete and determined that flagellin is foreign to me, so I'm going to present it in my, and back this up. I'm going to present it to the other cells and say, this is a bad guy. It's really, oh yes, it is a panda. Make antibodies to this. And then there'll be the other cells, B cells will make anti-panda antibodies that are specific to this panda, or a flagellin. And what's curious about all this is that, for example, I don't have Lyme arthritis, so I don't have the Steers kind of Lyme disease, and I don't have the Steers kind of genetic background where I'm going to have Lyme arthritis in the knee. I have the other kind that Mark Klempner found, the HLA DQB1 0602. And so these Borrelia antigens don't excite me. I don't have a hypersensitivity reaction to any of it. I have a typical chronic Lyme profile. Excuse me. Or I should say borreliosis, because basically Alan Steer and the Yale camp have grabbed the term Lyme and said it only means knee. But everybody else in the world can have borreliosis. There's at least 300 strains. Oscar Felsenfeld has said there's really almost no distinction between species and strains. It's just all Borrelia. So we yield to Alan Steer the imaginary disease, Lyme disease. Okay, it's amazing that anyone could believe spirochetes will just infect the knee temporarily and behave the way Kaiser would like them to. But so far, that's been sold to the American public. So, I, not being an Alan Steer Lyme kind of person, do not find OspA to be a superantigen or something I'm allergic to. People with different genetic backgrounds have different genetic programming for the shape of this HLA molecule. It's this, or it's this, or this. And a lot of the stimulation or hyperstimulation has to do with the kinetics, or how tightly I hold on to Mr. Panda. But if I'm holding on to him very intensely and it makes me mad, I'm going to make a lot of anti-panda antibodies. But that's not my case, and that's not the case of most people. Here is a schematic which I stole from a German website, Bettina Wilski's. This is the antibody concentration in the different forms of Lyme disease. Or let me just say borreliosis from now on. Unless I mean the imaginary disease that Steer came up with to falsely qualify Lymerix, I'll just refer to this as borreliosis from now on. People who have borreliosis or neuroborreliosis have a low antibody concentration. They're not hyper-responders. They don't get hysterical to Mr. Panda or OspA. But these people do. These are the Lyme patients. There's about 40 of them in the whole world, and Alan Steer keeps seeing the same ones over and over again. But also the acrodermatitis, I'm going to spell that, ACRODERMATITIS. You should look that up and look at the graphics of that, because that's a massive disease. It occurs in Europe. It's a skin disease, and it's really horrible. But that's also an inflammatory connective tissue disease. But those people have a very high antibody concentration. These are the bands, and this graphic is on the RICO complaint, which you can see scanned into my website. These are the bands, and this is the antibody concentration. The people who hijacked Lyme disease and said it's just Alan Steer's imaginary knee disease have made it so that here's the ELISA cutoff way up here. Most people who have neuroborreliosis or don't have Steer's imaginary Lyme disease are going to fall below the cutoff. So this two-tier testing schema where you have to have an ELISA, these are ELISAs. First, probably not, and there might even just be Western blots. They are the Western blots. The testing now, the CDC testing for Lyme or borreliosis says you're not going to have Lyme unless you have a knee disease or acrodermatitis, because here's the cutoff. It's going to miss most cases of Lyme. Arbitrarily decided by Alan Steer et al., Yale University, SmithKline, creeps who work at the CDC. And these are individual panels, Western blot panels. There's about, in this, I'm sure it doesn't look great on the camera, but there are several Western blot strips here. Again, because these are darker blots, it's because there's higher antibody concentration in the blood of these people. This is neuroborreliosis. There is no diagnostic code in any medical manual for this disease, neuroborreliosis. So no one can have it because Alan Steer and Yale wanted to sell a bogus Lyme vaccine. This is Lyme arthritis and acrodermatitis. This is neuroborreliosis, a disease that no one can have, that doesn't have a diagnostic code for, and this is a inflammatory, hyperinflammatory disease. They say a disease is inflammation when we know spirochetes are stealth pathogens. And you can look that up. We will get to that. Again, this is a booklet that I gave to the U.S. Attorney with a whole bunch of different antigens that have been identified as markers of disease by the very same people who say we now say we have hypochondria or are poisoning ourselves or our children, and it's imaginary disease and it's Lyme anxiety and all this other BS. Alan Steer at one time discovered that people with Lyme or borreliosis, this is earlier, have anti-cardiolipin and anti-ganglioside antibodies in their blood, a marker of disease that no one looks for now, because they would rather have some idiot psychiatrist or psychologist say you have anxiety or depression or some other non-specific, invalid term. I'm going to go through these quickly. And as a little aside, this is a picture of HLA molecule. Fourier transformed images of the electron cloud that represents the HLA molecule that were extracted and recrystallized and shot with an X-ray X-ray diffraction machine. And so we have this general shape. You can see this HLA molecule, remember, it's a clamshell-like molecule. It's holding an antigen against which your B cells are to make antibodies. And Donald Wiley, the murdered expert on influenza and so forth, was attempting to show whether or not myelin, a 10-fragment portion of a myelin molecule, fits in the HLA of the people who have the type of HLA that they think is associated with this kind of autoimmunity. So Don Wiley attempted to see if it is really possible that a human protein can fit in a human cell and that we can actually be allergic to ourselves. It was close, we had to go through great lengths to argue that there could possibly be autoimmunity. And Don Wiley, being an expert on influenza, attempted to see, this looks better in color, and you can find this on Medline. Just go Wiley, DC, and influenza on PubMed, like I showed yesterday. And you'll find this publication.